Welcome back everybody to the Wandering Samurai Study, in which we review and analyze every single act told in Rurouni Kenshin. And today's act is Act 28, Battle's End. And boy oh boy, this was kind of a meaty chapter. I think this is the first time that we've had about 40 pages for a chapter since the inaugural chapter of Rurouni Kenshin Act 1. But I really like this one. Like, the conclusion of the Oniwaban is so heartfelt, and it's kind of a culmination of everything that's kind of leading up to this moment, I guess. I mean, that's kind of how narratives work. As far as the actual story goes, there are things here that kind of give us hints about the future, and then we just get a whole bunch of reasoning for why things are kind of the way they are in relation to this act itself. No Megumi in this act, but that's okay. She's coming in the next video. Cool. Okay, so without further ado, we'll do the chapter summary and we'll get into the highlights. The battle between Aoshi and Kenshin concludes. Just as Yahiko and Kenshin ready their depart to search for Megumi, Aoshi rises again, asking Kenshin to finish him off. Kenshin explains his vow to never kill, and Aoshi claims that if he doesn't finish him now, he'll continue to come after Kenshin. With the battle over, Kenshin asks Aoshi why he's working as a hired sword for Kanryu, and Aoshi explains how the Meiji affected his men from adapting to society. But before things can wrap up neatly, Kanryu appears with a Gatling gun. The other members of the Oniwaban and Sanosuke make their way to the gunshots, and one by one, each of Aoshi's men sacrifice themselves to save Aoshi from Kanryu's hellstorm of bullets, giving Kenshin the opportunity to take down Kanryu once and for all. The chapter ends with all of the Oniwaban dead, a paralyzed Aoshi, and the Kenshingumi departing for Megumi. Yeah, there was a lot of carnage in this act. Kind of crazy to think about, with so much death in a story that's about not killing again, or atoning for death, or trying to minimize the number of deaths. I think it's all for the sake of impact, just to kind of show us that even though Kenshin is not trying to kill, death is still very much a real thing that is, or murder, not so much death, but murder is still a thing that is plaguing the Meiji era, and people such as Kanryu, such weak, simple men as Kanryu, who don't necessarily have fighting prowess, can stand above with their money and easily murder on a whim, out of fear, out of trying to maintain control of said situations. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about Aoshi. As Kenshin asks Aoshi how he managed to start working as a hired gun for Kanryu, and somebody at his caliber surely had to have opportunities presented to him, and Aoshi admits that there was tons. He wasn't even sure where they all came from, as he's somebody who's supposed to be working from the shadows. But he could not accept a job where he goes and rises in the world when his men, the other members of the Oniwaban, are failing to adapt to society, or society is rejecting them. And I love this detail about Aoshi, because suddenly he's not an evil guy. And it's funny because Sanosuke actually tells one of the Oniwaban members, like, man, you guys aren't all evil, and they kind of reply like, that's kind of a joke, right? We have characters such as Hanya that look like devils. They're not evil. They've just been dealt a bad hand through and through, all of them. And Aoshi is so noble and he's so faithful to his men that he is not willing to abandon them. He's taken them all in, and he's cultivated this family around his men that he can't just simply walk away from them knowing that they're going to be struggling while he is living an easy life. But on top of all of this, it just further supplements the idea that the Meiji isn't as rosy tinted as it was going to be made out to be after the Civil War. And you see this with the men, you see this with Shikijo, you see this with Hanya, Bashimi, and Hyotoko, that they all have reasons why they can't adapt to the Oniwaban. It seems that all of the other members that were behind Aoshi, they all found ways to leave the Oniwaban and adapt into society somehow. And the only ones that are left are these 5 men, or these 4 men. And for that, Aoshi needs to give them the title of the strongest, so that they have something to hold on to in pride, despite the world shunning them. and they all have their reasons on why they can't necessarily adapt. Beshimi and Hyotoko are men who have only one skill. They're kind of viewed as one trick ponies. Then there's Shikijo, who is considered a traitor who deflected from one side into the other for the sake of working with Aoshi. And then there's Hanya, and Hanya's face is very, very difficult to justify why anybody would take him in. That's kind of why he wears the mask, to hide his face, as he said it himself. And Aoshi said something that I thought was really worth noting, that just kind of suddenly came to me. He said something that the Tokugawa, the Emperor Tokugawa, he decided to take a position in history by deciding to concede and ending the Civil War so that bloodshed would be minimalized as much as possible. Everybody decides to take a side in history, and it's almost like he's giving kind of a praise to the former Tokugawa emperor, as like almost as to say that he did a noble thing to give in, and he can't do that. He can't just give in and let these men behind, which is also noble in its own way. These Rurouni Kenshin villains are all layered in such ways that makes them so sympathetic to think about. I found myself kind of liking Jine by the end, and wanting to see more of Jine, knowing that he couldn't adapt to the new era and he chose the life as the Hitokiri. And I'm finding that to be the same with the Oniwaban, men who just couldn't adapt to the Meiji, and feeling some sympathy for them. In the case of Beshimi and Hyotoko, it's not as easy for men to adapt, just as these men grew up during times of war, and so growing up in such hard times, you're likely to really just develop skills that center around war. And so in times of peace, you don't have those skills that make you optimal for peacetime. And I can see why it's difficult for these men to have trouble adjusting in the new era. On the topic of their deaths, I know that the deaths were all used for the purpose of impact, it to show death in such a hard light, that death can still, or murder can still exist in this new era, and can be caused by such feeble men as Konryu. But it also feels that the Oniwaban's death was kind of a cop-out for the characters, as a way for the author to not have to figure out what he's going to do with them after the fact. Because the Oniwaban were kind of established as men who aren't necessarily evil, and they could potentially find a place to exist in this world. But by killing them off, the author doesn't necessarily have to figure out what to do with them. He doesn't have to figure out what he's going to do with Hyotoko or Beshimi or even Hanya, who arguably has the most difficult time in all of this. It is kind of what it is, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because the author kind of wrote himself into a corner. But writing yourself into a corner, you kind of have to make creative decisions to get yourself out of them. And it's not like, spoiler alert for the future of Rurouni Kenshin, it's not like Watsuki just abandoned these characters, or abandoned Aoshi with the death of his comrades. It's not like he just wrote them off and just never brought them back, as we see later on in Kyoto, where Aoshi comes back with the intention of avenging the death of his comrades and giving them the title that he believed they deserved to have. It was tough to kill them off, but it was also to plant seeds for the future. And I have to, I guess, commend creative decisions such as these, because I know it's kind of difficult. But I think the worst thing to do is just kill them off and just forget about them entirely. And so now let's make our way to Konryu. And Konryu shows up with a Gatling gun. On the page itself, it has a text box explaining what a Gatling gun is. It's apparently a weapon that was made by a doctor named Gatling, and it is a gun that improved upon the weapons that were used in the Bakumatsu, and it was distributed to the rest of the world. Konryu got his hands on it. The model that he has is not one that is even known by the Meiji government yet, which is interesting. But Konryu was using the opium as a way to rise himself up in money to eventually start trading in arms and be essentially a merchant of death. It just further puts this character in such a wrong light. Where the Oniwaban have this redeemable factor to them, Konryu just continues to sink even lower. He is so of the capitalist mindset and being on the side that weapons and killing and murder itself is the ultimate way to become profitable. I think that there's some social commentary there, but I'll let you guys decide what you guys want to make of that social commentary. I just love, though, the contrast between Kenshin and Konryu in this presented light, where Konryu thinks that he has all of these men figured out and that he is now on the winning side, that he has the high ground with his Gatling gun, and Kenshin and all of the Oniwaban and Yahiko and Sanosuke, they're kind of at his mercy as he's going around with his Gatling gun. Even just from their appearances, where Kenshin is in traditional Japanese clothing and Konryu is in a suit, he has a gun. Kenshin is technically armless in the moment, but then Hanya gives him the opportunity to get his sword and take down Konryu. There's visual contrast, and then there's philosophical contrast, and I don't really know what more to say of it. Konryu, in the moment where he's shooting ammo at everybody, his greed and his arrogance show as he continues to toy with the men. But the moment where he finally runs out of ammo and he's begging for his life, the line where Kenshin says that if you so badly want to live, then why don't you pray to your money, is so cathartic, and it's my favorite moment of this entire act. And the final thing that I want to say about this act is in the beginning, where Kenshin and Yahiko are discussing things before moving on to Megumi. Kenshin has a moment where he does his odol. He has his goofy look about him. Yahiko points out that he hadn't seen that face in a while, and it's kind of nice to see it again. I love this as a visual indicator that lighthearted moments are about to come. So whenever you see this after not seeing it in a while, just know that lighthearted moments are coming in the near future. And I also like this in that we hadn't seen Kenshin doing this for a long time, and so it is nice to see it again. But then all of this carnage came following this moment with Yahiko and Kenshin. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Act 28 of Rurouni Kenshin and Video 28 of the Wandering Samurai Study. We are almost done with this story. We just need to get to Megumi, and it has been a wild ride. I think that this is actually the longest story that Watsuki has told so far, in terms of it all being within an arc. Such good stuff. I am looking forward to the conclusion. We've been at this for a good minute. But if you like this video and you want to see more, then consider subscribing to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. And comment down below, what have you thought so far of this story? What did you guys think of the death of the Oniwaban? What did you guys think of Aoshi not wanting to move on or rise up in life without his comrades? I'll talk to you guys in the next video. For now, I am winded. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, ciao.